Imagine this. You wake up in a room that hums with artificial light. The sun hasn't touched your skin in days, but you haven't noticed. Your phone lights up before your feet touch the floor, flooding your senses with curated images, digital applause, and unspoken expectations. You check your messages, your feed, your to-do list. And before you've even breathed in the morning, you are already behind. You brush your teeth with one hand while replying to emails with the other. You eat standing up. You speak more to machines than to people. When you do talk to others, the conversations skim the surface. Safe, efficient, polite. You laugh, but it doesn't feel real. You smile, but something deep inside you doesn't move. The day blurs into another. You are alive, yes, but only technically. And yet nothing seems wrong on paper. You have a roof over your head, a job, a schedule, Wi-Fi, entertainment on demand. Everything civilization promised would make life easier, better, more fulfilling is here. You should feel grateful, empowered, content. So why do you feel like something is missing? Like you've lost something important but can't quite name what it was? Why does it feel like you're fading? Like your soul is slowly evaporating, one scroll, one meeting, one checkbox at a time. You might tell yourself it's burnout, overwork, poor sleep. You might blame your career, your relationships, your body. You might promise yourself a vacation, or a new productivity app, or that one more achievement to finally feel alive again. But what if it's none of those things? What if the real problem isn't inside you, but around you? What if modern life, the very system we built to secure comfort, safety, and progress, is the very thing draining your spirit dry? What if the convenience, the efficiency, the constant stimulation, the never-ending need to perform isn't just tiring, it's soul-killing? This isn't just poetic exaggeration. This is the quiet horror we never speak of. The one we laugh off with memes and medicate with distractions. The one we feel in the silence between songs, in the hollowness of accomplishments, in the strange ache at 2 a.m. when you realize you've been busy for years, but you can't remember why. You were told to chase success. You chased. You were told to stay connected. You connected. You were told to optimize, hustle, grow, and adapt. You did all of that, but no one told you what the cost might be. And now, here you are. Hyper-productive, hyper-connected, hyper-stimulated, and quietly, spiritually bankrupt. Isn't it strange? That in an era of unprecedented freedom, you feel more imprisoned than ever? That with endless tools for self-expression, your voice feels more artificial, more filtered, more hollow? That in a world of constant interaction, loneliness is still an epidemic? Is this progress, or is it something else entirely? Because here's the real paradox. What if everything you've been told to strive for, success, status, stimulation, safety, was never meant to nourish your soul? What if these comforts were designed to serve the body, distract the mind, and sedate the spirit? And more disturbingly, what if modern life doesn't accidentally destroy the soul, but requires its destruction to function? What if your aliveness, your curiosity, your depth, your longing for truth, what if these things are threats to a system built on superficiality, distraction, and conformity? What if the part of you that still aches, the part that wants silence, beauty, authenticity, purpose, that part isn't broken, but rather it's the only part that's still awake? So you try to numb it, to silence it. You tell yourself to be grateful, to be realistic, to adapt, but it keeps whispering. At night, in the shower, during commutes and in stolen moments of solitude, it keeps asking, what happened to you? What happened to wonder, to slowness, to depth? What happened to the real you, before the algorithms, before the schedules, before your spirit was carved into calendar slots and monetized through metrics? If you've ever felt this ache, you are not crazy, You are not broken. You are not alone. You are simply still human in a world that has forgotten what humanity is for. And so we must ask the great and terrifying question: what if modern life is not just making you tired, but making you less alive? What if the world you're adapting to was never meant to hold a soul as complex, wild, and luminous as yours? And if that's true, what can you do about it? Let's go deeper. Let's unravel how we got here, why we stay here, and what it would mean to finally wake up. Because maybe your soul isn't gone. Maybe it's just buried beneath the noise, the pressure, and the illusion. And maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting to be found. So how did we get here? How did a world once lit by starlight, prayer, and poetry become flooded with fluorescent buzz and algorithmic noise? How did we move from wondering why we exist to obsessing over notifications and screen time? How did the human soul, curious, conflicted, hungry for transcendence, become a commodity, a data point, a target for monetization? To understand the sickness of the soul, we must first understand the system it was forced to survive in. Carl Jung believed that modern life was leading us into a crisis of meaning, a collective neurosis brought on by the loss of myth, ritual, and connection to the deeper layers of the unconscious. We traded our ancient symbols for corporate logos, our inner archetypes for online avatars. And in doing so, something essential was severed. The soul doesn't speak in likes or shares. It doesn't thrive in schedules or spreadsheets. It speaks in silence, in dreams, in longing, in paradox. And yet the world we've built rewards the exact opposite: clarity, efficiency, speed, productivity. You were born into a society that prizes the rational mind above all else. From a young age, you were trained to calculate, to plan, to analyze, to treat life as a problem to be solved, not a mystery to be lived. Wonder was replaced with logic, intuition with metrics, depth with speed. But what happens when the soul, which lives in depth and contradiction, is forced into a system that only values surface and control? It splits. You begin to perform a version of yourself that fits the world's mold: confident, competent, endlessly busy, while another version silently retreats into the shadows. That shadow is where your unexpressed truth lives, your buried sadness, your quiet rage, your real questions. And the longer you live at odds with your own inner world, the more hollow you feel. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us long ago, when a culture loses touch with its higher values, when it kills its gods and fails to replace them with something sacred, nihilism seeps in. Not always in the form of despair. Sometimes it wears the mask of progress, of ambition, of endless growth. But beneath it is the same rot, a world where nothing is truly meaningful and everything is for sale. You see, modernity didn't just steal our time. It colonized our imagination. It turned identity into branding, relationships into transactions, purpose into productivity. And so, you work harder, hustle more, reinvent yourself again and again. But each version feels less real than the last. Because deep down, you're not becoming more yourself. You're becoming more marketable. Arthur Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, believed that human suffering stemmed from the blind, ceaseless striving of the will, a metaphysical hunger that could never be satisfied. And what is modern consumer culture if not a cathedral built to worship that very hunger? Every ad whispers, "You are not enough, unless you buy this, wear this, become this." And every time you listen, you feed the machine, but starve your soul. But it's not just capitalism. It's not just technology. The problem is deeper, older. Modern life has severed the bridge between the outer world and the inner world. We've forgotten how to feel deeply, how to be still, how to listen to the voice within, the one that speaks in symbols, synchronicities, and soul aches. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of bad faith, the condition of lying to oneself in order to escape the burden of freedom. In a world obsessed with image and performance, isn't that exactly what we've become? Experts in pretending, masters of self-deception. We smile while dying inside because admitting our truth would break the illusion. And no one wants to be the first to admit they feel lost in a world that claims to have found all the answers. You live in a time of infinite access, and yet spiritual starvation is rampant. You can download sacred texts in seconds, but how often do you sit with your own pain? You can filter your face with a tap, but have you faced your own shame? You can scroll through thousands of voices, but how often do you hear your own? Aldous Huxley in Brave New World warned of a dystopia not ruled by fear, but by pleasure. A society so drugged, entertained, and distracted that people would come to love their servitude. And isn't that the world we now inhabit? A world where the greatest threat to awakening isn't oppression, but sedation. You're not chained. You're overfed, overstimulated, over-engaged in a million shallow ways, and undernourished in the ones that matter. Silence has become uncomfortable. Depth feels like a threat. You scroll to avoid the confrontation of your own emptiness. And here lies the core of the problem. Modern life doesn't destroy your soul by attacking it directly. It erodes it through substitution. Authenticity is replaced by performance, stillness by stimulation, mystery by information, connection by contact, meaning by marketing, presence by productivity, and in that slow, imperceptible drift, you lose touch with who you are, not because you've changed, but because you've been distracted from remembering. And so the great paradox emerges. You are surrounded by everything, and still starving for something real. But don't turn away from this tension. Sit with it. Feel it. Because it is not your enemy. It is the doorway. The ache you feel is not weakness. It's your soul calling you back. You were never meant to live in a system that asks you to be less than fully human. So the question is no longer, why do I feel this way? But rather, what happens if I keep going this way? If I keep performing instead of feeling? If I keep consuming instead of creating? If I keep adapting to a system that profits from my disconnection? Something must give. Because a soul can only be stretched so far before it breaks. And so we turn now toward the hidden consequences, not the loud, obvious ones, but the subtle devastations that ripple through our identities, our relationships, and our futures when the soul begins to forget its own name. You think you're functioning, you get up, you work, you smile at the cashier, you answer messages with emojis, you even laugh at the right moments. But underneath the routine, something is unraveling. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but slowly, quietly, like a candle losing oxygen in a sealed room. That's the insidious nature of spiritual erosion. It doesn't announce itself with catastrophe. It whispers, it numbs, it makes you forget what it felt like to be truly alive. And that forgetting is the first consequence. You forget how to be bored. You forget what silence sounds like. You forget how to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for distraction. You forget how to create for the sake of creating. You forget how to weep without shame, to play without purpose, to listen without preparing a response. You begin to confuse stimulation with satisfaction. You begin to mistake scrolling for connection. You confuse efficiency with progress. You confuse being known with being seen. The soul shrinks, not because it's weak, but because the environment offers it no soil in which to grow. And the modern world? It's not made of soil. It's made of screens. Let's go deeper. Neurologically, the constant flood of digital information rewires your brain. Dopamine spikes from notifications, likes, and novelty stimuli train you to crave the next thing, not the meaningful thing, just the next. The soul thrives on depth and slowness. The brain, when overstimulated, becomes addicted to speed and surface. You might think you have ADH. You might think you're just bad at focusing. But perhaps your focus hasn't failed you. Perhaps it's rebelling. Perhaps it's resisting a system that was never meant to be natural in the first place. Cognitively, this state of fragmented attention breeds a phenomenon called continuous partial attention. You're never fully here, but never fully gone. You exist in a perpetual limbo, half present, half thinking of somewhere else. And in that split awareness, nothing feels real anymore. Your morning coffee? Drunk while answering emails. Your relationships? Maintained through filtered images and double taps. Your dreams? Postponed until someday becomes never. Emotionally, the consequence is even deeper. When you live in a state of chronic distraction and performance, your emotional range contracts. You begin to fear vulnerability because it slows you down. You repress sadness because it's not productive. You avoid joy because it might make you look childish. Instead, you settle into a gray zone, functional, polite, but spiritually colorless. Modern life convinces you to trade authenticity for acceptance, to choose stability over soul. And this trade happens so subtly that most people never even notice they've made it, until the cost shows up, masked as restlessness, apathy, low-grade anxiety, or a midlife crisis. Or worse, it never shows up at all. Because you've numbed so thoroughly, distracted so skillfully, and conformed so completely that your soul no longer even aches to be heard. Culturally, there's another consequence: the normalization of disconnection. We've begun to see depth as a liability. Long conversations are too much. Real intimacy feels intense. Existential questions are laughed off as overthinking. People don't want to be shaken awake. They want to be sedated into certainty. And so we collectively agree, let's keep it light. Let's keep it fast. Let's keep it safe. But the soul doesn't want safety. It wants meaning. It wants truth. It wants to touch the bottom of things. And when it doesn't get that, it atrophies. You see it in the workplace, endless Zoom meetings where no one speaks their mind. You see it in relationships, two people lying in bed facing opposite screens. You see it in art, content designed not to move you but to hook you. You see it in yourself, that flicker of unease when someone asks, "How are you really?" And you realize you don't even know the answer anymore. And the consequences don't stop with the individual. A society of spiritually numb individuals creates spiritually hollow institutions. Politics becomes performance. Education becomes test scores. Religion becomes spectacle. Medicine becomes symptom suppression. Art becomes advertising. Community becomes branding. And the most terrifying part? We start to forget it was ever different. We forget that conversations used to go for hours without phones, that boredom once led to daydreams, that creating was once about soul, not monetization. That belief was once sacred, not commodified. That time with loved ones was once enough, not a backdrop to content creation. This is what Fyodor Dostoevsky warned us about when he said, "Man only likes to count his troubles. He doesn't calculate his happiness." Because the modern world is designed to measure, quantify, and optimize everything, except the most important things. Can you measure awe? Can you monetize presence? Can you optimize wonder? Number. And so we discard them. We trade them for what can be tracked. And in doing so, we begin to malfunction at the level of the soul. So what happens next? We chase louder stimulation to fill the void. New goals, new identities, new content, new addictions. We become obsessed with becoming someone better, but have no idea who we are right now. We ask technology to do what only presence can. We ask apps to give what only meaning can. We ask society to approve what only your soul can validate. And all the while, something inside you whispers, "This isn't it. This can't be it." Because deep down, you remember. You remember what it felt like to lose yourself in play, to cry without apology, to walk without a destination, to speak without a script, to love without fear. That memory, that echo, is the soul trying to resurrect itself. But it won't come back on its own. You must invite it. You must rebel against the numbness, the speed, the performance. You must say, enough. I refuse to be optimized to death, because until you do, you remain trapped, not by chains, but by convenience, by comfort, by the seduction of not having to feel. But rebellion is possible, and it doesn't begin with revolution. It begins with remembering. So now we ask the next question, not as a theory, but as an act of spiritual defiance. What does it look like to break free? It won't be loud. The rebellion against soul death won't start with a battle cry or a viral post or a digital detox. It won't be polished. It won't be convenient. And it definitely won't be rewarded, at least not at first. Because breaking free isn't about escaping the world. It's about refusing to let the world remake you in its image. It begins in the smallest of moments, the moment you choose stillness over speed, silence over noise, truth over comfort, presence over productivity. Imagine this. You wake up, not to your alarm, not to your to-do list, not to your notifications, but to your own breath. For a few sacred seconds, you don't reach for your phone. You reach inward. You ask yourself, what do I feel? What do I need? What have I forgotten about myself? That's where the rebellion begins, with remembrance. The system thrives on your forgetfulness. It wants you to forget your depth, your sovereignty, your wildness, your power to create meaning. To remember, really remember, is a threat to everything the machine wants from you. And what does it want? Compliance, predictability, consumption, silence. So how do you rebel? You do what the machine cannot understand. You slow down. You go deep. You say no, without apology. You create, not for followers, not for profit, but because something inside you is begging to be born. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But modern life doesn't want you to become, it wants you to perform. Jung knew that individuation, becoming whole, requires confronting your shadow, your unlived life, your repressed truths. This is not comfortable work. It is radical. It is subversive. It is necessary. To break free, you must first be willing to face yourself. Sit with your pain, not to fix it, but to listen to it. Sit with your boredom, not to escape it, but to let it stretch into wonder. Sit with your rage, not to shame it, but to ask, what boundary was violated? What truth was ignored? This is the language of the soul. It is messy, unmarketable, unscalable, and that's why it's sacred. You must also reclaim your attention. Your attention is the most sacred currency you possess. Where it flows, your reality forms. But in a world engineered to hijack it, reclaiming it is an act of rebellion. Turn off the noise. Leave your phone in another room. Spend an entire day without producing anything. Let yourself be useless, unproductive, unoptimized. Watch what emerges. At first, it will feel unbearable. That's not failure, that's detox. You're coming down from a culture addicted to performance, and in the quiet, something strange will happen. You will hear yourself again. That still, small voice, the one drowned out by noise and obligation, will start to speak. It may sound unsure at first, rusty, hesitant, but it's real, and it's yours. Listen to it. That voice knows what you've forgotten. It remembers who you were before the world told you who to be, and it remembers how to create, not to impress or to win, but because creating is how the soul breathes. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz and one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But modern life wants you to change in ways that make you easier to control, more efficient, more agreeable, more distracted." Frankl's rebellion was different. It was about reclaiming meaning, even in the face of unbearable suffering. And here's the truth. You do not need perfect conditions to live meaningfully. You do not need the world to slow down for you to slow down. You just need the courage to stop running, to sit, to feel, to ask with unflinching honesty, what am I trading my life for? Then change direction, and don't expect applause, because this rebellion, it's invisible, it's quiet, but it is the most dangerous thing you can do in a system built on noise. Want to rebel? Start walking instead of scrolling. Want to rebel? Talk to strangers without checking your phone. Want to rebel? Create art and don't post it. Want to rebel? Turn your notifications off, for good. Want to rebel? Say what you mean, even when your voice shakes. Want to rebel? Do nothing for an hour, and let it be enough. These acts seem small, but they are earthquakes in a world addicted to performance. Because the moment you stop trying to keep up is the moment you remember you were never meant to. You were meant to wake up. You were meant to see through the game. You were meant to live deeply, not just efficiently. You were meant to choose truth over approval, presence over speed, soul over brand. It doesn't end with rebellion. Because once you've pulled away from the noise, once you've stopped sprinting toward illusions, and once you've turned inward instead of outward, something deeper begins to stir. At first, it's just a flicker, a strange calm, a quiet certainty, a whisper that says, this is what it feels like to be real again. But if you listen closely, if you keep showing up for your inner life, if you honor the ache rather than avoiding it, you don't just heal from modern life. You transcend it. And that's the ultimate truth most never reach. The soul wasn't just damaged by modern life. It was never meant to survive it. Not in its current form. Not in this manic, commodified, disconnected architecture of living. You were never meant to exist in a world that trades your time for profit, your curiosity for consumption, your uniqueness for brand identity. You were never meant to be a product in someone else's algorithm, a cog in a machine you didn't choose. The real you, the raw, luminous, chaotic soul inside, was not built for this. You were built for something else, to feel, to suffer, to create, to connect, to mean something. And modern life, in its mechanical rush toward progress, forgot that. It forgot the human being. But now you remember. And here's where the final shift happens. Not just a rebellion against something, but a return to something. You come home. Not to your house, not to your job, not even to your goals. You come home to your soul. And in that home, everything feels different. Not easier, but truer. You still live in the same world, but you no longer belong to it. You no longer seek permission to slow down. You no longer crave the validation of strangers. You no longer sacrifice your presence for productivity. Because you've seen what lies beneath the surface. And you can't unsee it. You know now that most people are performing, that most smiles hide exhaustion, that most success is just well-marketed emptiness, that most of modern life is a race to nowhere. But rather than resenting it, you begin to forgive it. You see that others are sleepwalking because they're afraid. Afraid of what silence might say. Afraid of what truth might cost. Afraid of what they might lose if they stop running. But you've stopped. And in that stillness, something astonishing happens. You become whole. The parts of you that were splintered, the performer, the pleaser, the numbed-out worker, the overstimulated addict, the anxious achiever, begin to dissolve. And what remains is something ancient, something wild, something real. You start noticing beauty in places you once rushed past. You look at your own hands and feel awe. You listen to a friend, not just to respond, but to witness. You read books that don't teach you how to be better, but how to be deeper. You no longer chase your worth, you remember it. And when the world tries to pull you back in, with urgency, with pressure, with fear, you smile. Not with arrogance, with compassion. Because you understand now. The system is not evil. It is just empty. It was built to keep bodies alive, not souls awake. And so the final realization arrives, not as thunder, but as a whisper that echoes through every corner of your life. You were never broken. You were just buried. And your soul never stopped waiting. It waited while you played roles. It waited while you chased dreams that weren't yours. It waited through the noise, the hustle, the burnout, the shame. It waited while you forgot, and it whispered through the cracks. And now, you've heard it. You've remembered. And that is enough. You don't need to fix everything. You don't need to burn down your life. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to stop abandoning yourself and start honoring the quiet truth inside, because in the end, the soul does not speak in the language of progress. It speaks in presence. It does not demand perfection. It asks only for intimacy. It does not care how many people see you. It cares whether you see you. And when you do, when you finally sit across from your own reflection and say, "There you are. I remember now," everything changes. Not the world, you. And when you change, the world feels different. Not because it is, but because you're awake inside it. So take a breath. Feel the weight lift. Let the urgency dissolve. And say it with me. I am not a product. I am not a machine. I am not a brand. I am a soul, alive, awake, unfinished, and free.